if your spouse is going to be something that will either hold you back from your calling or propel you into it, God's going to care a lot about that. Yeah. And he's going to be involved in those details. So you seek after him, and he'll make sure the righteous man's steps are ordered of the Lord.
All right, guys, here we are at y'all's house in your studio. This is a fun change up for Heart of Dating. But welcome, Arden and Christian. We're so excited to have you guys. This is so fun.
Yeah, excited to be here.
I'm glad I get to be on the episode with you guys.
I don't do a lot of dating shows outside of Christian's. So
That's
like not dating shows.
Returning guest, right?
You are.
Yeah,
From a long time ago.
Okay, 2018. You were on the podcast
Yes.
in 2018,
Yeah.
I believe.
Has anything changed since then?
I'm married, have 2 kids. A lot of change.
That was the year a lot changed. That's the year we met, got engaged, and got married.
Yes.
Which tells you a lot about our
You
timeline.
guys all in the same year?
Yeah.
All in the same year.
I don't know. Should we cancel this?
Yeah, sorry, we canceled podcast.
Sorry.
Wait, and first time on Heart of Dating for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, which is
so
crazy.
Yeah.
we'll see in 6 years from now if you're invited back.
We're still going strong, you know.
But fun fact about that first episode, which guys, you can go to the archives, but I'm just going to let you know, I have no idea what that episode sounded like thinking back to our first episode.
I remember being in that studio too. I think it was maybe you being on Sons and Daughters podcast, and it was a very interesting setup where I just remember we're looking in a computer screen, and then we had a big studio all around us, and I was like, I really hope this turns out good.
That's right. I feel like that was around both of our book launches, probably time frame. But that time with the first podcast, 2018, you know, you came on as a single guy, but technically you and Christian were talking or dating.
Yeah, he's a liar. No, it was in that early stage. So you were still single.
I was
not
still
married.
single.
And you watched the interview, doing your homework, making sure.
I was like, let's see what you really like.
I was trying to remember the timeline on
I
it
was
all.
so used to his mom auctioning him and the boys off at when she spoke.
Every time.
So anytime
here are my
he was
boys
like,
and these ones are single.
yeah, I just was like, okay, you know what, God, if he's the one, keep him from these other women. But here we are.
And wasn't that also the year? So Austin got engaged, and then Alec did that hilarious video with Ruth, the statue.
Yeah, the
was it?
statue.
You have to go back and see
Austin and I got engaged. We were 5 days apart.
That's
and then
right.
Alec came in and actually stole the spotlight with his proposal to a statue. I'm like, oh, thank you, Alec.
What did the statue say?
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, yes.
It's written all over her face. You know?
It was Ruth and Boaz. Of course it was.
Oh, amazing. So he slept at her feet, little reversal.
Yeah, pretty much. For a long time.
We got to bring up that video.
Okay,
again.
wait. So how did you guys meet? Because was it in the DMs on Facebook, MySpace, or
MySpace going way back. It was 2018, not 2008.
Carrier pigeon.
But I slid into her DM. I saw a picture of her. She was with another one of my friends, and I saw a picture with
it was
her.
someone that was applying to work for the ministry.
Yeah, but I knew her, and she was a
looking at
friend.
her doing
due
Yeah,
diligence.
not that kind of friend. But then I saw a picture of her, and I was like, I have to reach out. And I remember I was like, no, I don't want to be that guy that sends a DM. I was like, I'll wait and do 24 hours. Like, if it's a good idea now, it's a good idea in 24 hours.
Which pause, the photo was a photo that I was like, oh my gosh, please delete. I look horrible. So if you want confidence, ladies, just keep it, you know.
beauty's in the eye of the
beauty.
beholder?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it caught my
It could
attention.
lead to your future husband.
There was a lot of reasons why it caught my attention. But anyways, I was like 24 hours. If it's a good idea then now, it'll be a good idea in 24 hours. I think I waited like 8 hours. I couldn't make it the full 24.
No, I think
and
you
then
were
reached
talking
out.
with Tracy and you're like, I'm going to wait a week.
No.
And then it was a few days.
No, it was 24 hours. I couldn't make it 24 hours.
He was like, trust me, I would not have
it
put a
didn't
week.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I reached out, and then we actually got together for coffee 3 weeks later. And during that time period, I told her, I was like, we're not going to build our relationship or like even just talking with each other over messages or DMs. I was like, so I will only call you. So I called her 2 times in between that time period just to show her like, I'm a real person. You're a real person.
Yeah.
Let's see how we interact. And then we went on our first date, and it was like 8-hour date. We did like 5 hours.
We were
and
long
then
distance
yeah,
for
we
Wait,
had a gap.
so you were in Alabama at the time, and you were in Colorado. Okay,
And then we met in Florida.
Yeah.
Because, you know,
that
why
makes
not?
sense. Halfway, yeah.
Which is where we went on our first date, and we got engaged and married all in the same spot.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
the
named our
exact
daughter
same
after.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Middle name.
I love it. Okay, so met in Florida, First date, nervous, excited. I
think Christian
Arden
was
a little
very
awkward.
nervous.
Or,
Migraine, honestly.
okay.
So we were like having like these deep heart to hearts. I was like,
You're like barely opening your eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, is she falling asleep?
I tried
This is
to
amazing.
get her to come out of her shell because I was like, on her Instagram, she looked like a very fun person, and she was just kind of a little bit more serious on our date, and I couldn't tell if she was nervous. So I put on "Call Me Maybe" as as like the first thing as I picked her up, and I was like, "Hey, do you remember the Harvard school dance where it's like the guys are in the band and they're dancing to Harvard or to Call Me Maybe?" And I did that dance for her to like try to get her out of her shell, and she just
Because she was just looking at you the whole time.
she's like,
it actually made the migraine like 5 times worse.
Yeah, she's like
turning
this,
it up.
Am I
this is terrible. But it worked.
no, I think the craziest part of our first date was we met both the parents.
Yeah.
We
Whoa.
met.
Not your
Yes.
dad.
So
This is
unconventional.
wild.
That is so crazy.
And board members.
Yes, it's very pedal to metal.
Yeah.
Pedal to the metal. Metal to the pedal. That's it.
Yeah.
Sleep deprived. Nothing really makes sense right now.
So pedal to the metal.
Pedal to the metal.
That was so you guys were both on like vacation at the same kind of place in Florida. So it was just like, hey, this is this is almost like Bachelor on TV, you know, like meeting the family.
Yeah.
Everything's accelerated. So at the end of the week, you guys were like, that was
We're
a
good to
lot.
go.
Yeah.
Actually, at the end of that day, we were both like, man, we really want to see you. Well, I was like, I really want to see you again.
Yeah. I remember it was a phone call the next day was when I knew it was my wife. I was like, we had a 2-hour long phone call where all we talked about was like, she asked me all the hard questions, was like, hey, I'm not looking to date just to date. And she was like, so I'm just going to start asking you these things and we'll have conversations around it. And she just kind of grilled me on a bunch of things. And I walked away from that call.
Romantically, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, all right, that's my wife. And I'm like, I know this is supposed to be the one.
What
and
was
like
the hardest question that she asked?
Well, she asked like all these questions around things that I was just not expecting for after the first date. So it was talking about like, what's your goals for your future? How many kids? Like talked through some of these big things that I was like, wow. Okay. Well, I really was in a position where I didn't want to just date to date. Like I wanted to know that I was going to move forward with my wife. And so I felt good about our first date. And then hearing her like, hey, what's on your heart? What do you see your future being? What's been your relationship with God look like? What's your dynamic with your family? Like going through all these things. And I'm like, okay, like she's serious too.
Yeah.
And I feel peace on it. And that wasn't saying like, hey,
I got the ring tomorrow.
I got the ring. We're good to go. No, and ignore all red flags that came up. Like it was just, I was like,
Not red
okay,
flags.
I knew.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
No, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
if they came up, I felt like, okay, I know that I'm supposed to continue to keep pursuing this in the way that I know this is going to be my wife. And I told her dad that too, which
That's a story.
he kind of, I think he blocked that part from his mind because when I called him 2 months later to ask him like, hey, can I marry your daughter? He was like, no. Like, no. Yeah. I was like, I told you 2 months ago, this is where we would be.
My dad's a girl dad with
Yes.
3 daughters.
Yeah.
And I was the first to leave. So it was like, hold up there, buddy.
Yeah, I feel like you feel that with Eleanor.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
I
I think any
Oh, yeah.
Feel that.
Oh no,
I mean, I'm sure with Tatum, like,
I looked at Christian last night and I said, I think I just want to be that dad that just stares at the boyfriend like the whole time.
Yeah.
Just like, doesn't even say anything to him.
man.
Like,
At daycare, when we were at Lifetime months ago, Eleanor was playing with her first boy, and JJ walks in, and he's like,
I was flipping Play-Doh tables and
Yeah.
I was causing a ruckus.
way to make a scene. I love
No,
it.
but I think like any dad is going to be protective. I would hope after 3 months, like,
Yeah.
well, no, or at least, well, I have concerns or caution.
Yeah.
It's been such a short amount of time as much as I like you. I mean, look, if you came to me and I had a daughter, I'd be like, look,
I understand his reaction.
yeah,
You know? Like,
no
I get
one
it.
wants to say yes
Yeah.
more than me, Arden. Like,
Yeah.
you're a handsome, amazing guy. We can go golf.
Let's go
But-
golf.
Dad,
There you go.
come on.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, and the funny thing was, I thought she had told me her mom was on board, and that for me, just not knowing the dynamic there, I remember just not knowing how much maybe was communicated. And so I think even for her dad, I didn't realize like they hadn't talked a lot about it. And so I was like, yeah, I've talked to her mom about it. Like, she was great with it. I'll probably be the same conversation with her dad. And then I remember even talking with him, I'm like, I see this tick you off guard. And I was like, how about we have a follow-up conversation in 24 hours? You can think about it. You can like see with it. And we did. And it was an interesting conversation. And I love her dad. Like, he's an absolutely incredible man. And he's been so welcoming of me, but I understand why he was
he
like,
loves his daughter.
He loves his daughter, and it was being protective.
Which is interesting. Going back to me to that second date is my MO, my personality is not so much like, hey, like heavy hitter, let's I'm deep, but I'm not as passionate. I think that's more your personality. So it's interesting to me, even looking back, of how I feel like God's so in the details of how he joins people together, where it's like you might not even realize what you need before you meet someone or what's important to you. Because I never asked someone on the second date, how many kids do you want? Like, what do you want to do? But we were both in this season of knowing our blind spots in dating. Yeah. And I think just the way God orchestrated us and our personality and coming together it was a faster one, but it was so for a reason. Those reasons we probably don't fully know until we're in heaven one day. But there's so much within timeline that I think it's not just, well, I want a short engagement or so-and-so did it this way, but it's actually unique to the couple. Yeah. And I was in a point of, I know I'm not really great in dating. So Lord, I really want to be keen. I want to be discerning. I don't want to waste my time or someone else's. So someone may be watching this thinking, well, how'd you have a short engagement? Or like, why did you ask those questions? Because of my history. Your history may look different. Yeah. Your timeline may look different, but be true to what you feel like is prompting and what you need to know, the questions you have to ask, the things that you are looking for, because it's important.
So what I love that you guys are bringing up, because we did an episode a few weeks ago in this season about pace, and you guys are obviously the unconventional story, because we typically recommend date for a year. And that's based out of wisdom of where we come from with that is with, coaching hundreds and hundreds of couples. The majority of people don't have great wisdom. They don't have great counsel. We talked about this just with you on your podcast, and they don't really know what they're looking for, which we'll talk about today. They maybe are coming in with brokenness. And so therefore they might meet someone, and what feels amazing and feels like it's from God is often infatuation, is often they're filling all these holes in my heart that I haven't already healed or haven't worked on. And it just feels like I'm complete now. And therefore I'm just going to rush, submarine, go under the surface, not let anybody see any of the details, and then pop up and be like, I'm engaged. And everyone's like, what? Who is this person? We don't even know this person, And so I do love, though, that your story is different, because, what our suggestion isn't the rule. It's just what we see for the majority of people, because they don't have a lot of wisdom or health behind them. And so what is clear to me in y'all's story is you guys were coming in with great wisdom and counsel behind you, and with a clarity of what you're looking for. And you're not here to mess around. You're not here to just date to date. You're like, hey, I have some brokenness in my past, or maybe I dated some people I didn't want to date. I know what I'm looking for. And so I love that you come in on the second date and you're like, here's my questions. If we're going to move forward, like, that was amazing. And I think it's everything that I'm looking for, but let me hit you with all these hard questions. So I'm so curious, like, what were the lessons you guys learned to form those questions, Christian, or form the things that you were looking for that did give y'all peace towards each other?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but I came from doing dating wrong. And that was the same time I graduated from college. All my friends were getting married. I was taking a job back in my hometown. So I was like, man, everything feels like everyone else is going forward and I'm taking 2 steps back. Yeah. And I'm so thankful that God showed me this is a time of cultivating, like taking some things out of your personality or even what you're looking for and really getting keen. So I spent half a year doing what I call like my husband's Bible. And I would pray for my future husband. And it really not just like, okay, God, I know this is coming and like, bless it, bring it. But it was more of, okay, deconstruct the things that I've put in my own mind. Right. Give me a heart to see him. Give me a heart to be a wife. Give me peace in that, yes, I'm believing for this thing to come, but I'm not rushing to the next date. I'm not rushing to settle. And for me, I think that helped me even identify areas where I had been blind before, things that I did need to look for in a spouse that I was unaware of. And it really just garnered something of strength within me for that season that I don't think I had before.
Yeah.
And so that was like my biggest thing is going to the hidden place. Like so much of dating, like you're saying, is only hidden when we're like, oh, I got my thing and I'm going to hide it to myself.
Yeah.
But what does it look like to be hidden in singleness? What does it look like to say, God, I want your voice in this even before I meet someone? And I'm aware that our timeline is maybe less conventional today. And even the way that we dated or the things that I felt peace on, like during that time of praying, I felt like God gave me a vision, a little bit of what my husband would look like or act like, not in a superficial way.
Yeah.
But without going too long, I had a dream where my husband was wearing glasses. He's someone I had never met before, and he's from a place I'd never been. So I was like, okay, interesting. I can go off of that. It wasn't that, oh, he's going to be 6'3" and he's going to be like Insta famous, like any of that stuff.
Scratch golfer.
Yeah.
Great jawline.
An Italian, masterpiece.
Yeah.
But he gave me very keen things. And I feel like sometimes today we want to have the checklist so much, or we want it to like all make sense on paper, but we really can be bold of, okay, God, I want you to give me discernment super early to make sure I'm following your will. I want you to give me signs and clarity because I trust you in this. And so that's where I would say you don't have to be bold in like what it looks like and like prove I know he's the one because like God just told me, but be bold in asking God, give me vision and clarity because I want what's best for me. And I know that you know that more than I do.
Which for reference, I did wear glasses. And now I got LASIK. So like there was a completion of all three of those things.
I'm like, where's the Jude Law glasses?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
It's like there was some of that in the past. But
bittersweet experience.
But and I feel like on my side, it was more of, I felt like obviously had a great upbringing and very felt emotionally like, hey, I've dated, but I really didn't feel like I was very much driven by emotions within dating. I looked more of like, I always had a plan within my first date of making sure I didn't do too much, but that I was very much intentional around the questions and conversations I would have. And then always would move it over to a conversation of like, hey, either I felt really great about this or I didn't feel like we connected. And
did you learn that the hard way? Like
in a way,
being a little too friendly. And soft,
I would do too much on the first date, and then it would make it feel like the girl would like
be in love. Yeah.
I'm in love with you. And I remember I had this really wise old lady in Australia. She sat me down and I told her everything that I did, and she was like, Arden, a girl would be crazy if she wouldn't have fallen in love with you after that first date. And she's like, you did way too much. So you set them up to basically lose if you don't feel the same way.
Because a lot of guys will hear that and be like, well, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
That I'm charismatic and charming.
I forced myself. I made sure that anything that I started, I had to bring back. So I forced myself after, even if it was just a coffee date or some kind of date, I had to have an intentional phone call with the person. I couldn't text them. I couldn't do something like that. I had to call them and tell them my thoughts on it. And like, hey, I don't feel like this is something. So I didn't leave them in this place. And I would make it so I couldn't go too far.
I could have used that.
Yeah.
I could have used that lesson.
Yeah. So that was something that going into dating for us, it was like, I felt very much aware of those things and didn't feel like I was operating underneath brokenness. I felt very secure where I was spiritually with those things. And so I was more looking at, even like when we're talking about a list, like I remember when I wrote out my list for what I wanted to see in my wife, I wrote it out right next to, I wrote out a big vision for my life in terms of the things that I saw that God was putting on my heart, what it looked like I was going to build. And it was basically this Antioch thing that I had dreams around, and I built a big web. And then I remember thinking, okay, here's what I feel like God's given me the vision of. I can't accomplish that on my own. I've watched as my parents have done ministry together all their life, and I need a partner that's going to come into alignment with this. So I remember I created my list based off of the vision that God gave me, of not of my wife, but off of like, okay, in order to accomplish this, I need a woman that's going to be spiritually mature, that's going to challenge me, that's going to have passions that are similar to mine. And I did, of course, put down some things. I put down brown hair and put down 5'7". I remember I showed it to you, 5'7", 5'6", I think I said. Yes. Yes, very cook. Like good cook and things like that. But it was also, a lot of it was frameworked off of that. Yeah. And so just coming into that moment when we had that first date, I felt like, okay, I've not been emotionally controlled in the past. I've normally felt it very good. And even having this conversation, I was like, I knew I was just ready. Like, this is the person I'm supposed to continue to keep pursuing.
Well, God answered you in the Antioch thing with my...
Oh yeah, we were on our first date, and I remember we were sitting, and God gave me a vision of Antioch, and that's what I felt like God had placed on our heart to build something like that. And I remember I just have always prayed into that, thought about it, and on our first date, I look at her phone, and she has just a random structure, like ruins on it, and I was like, "What is that?" And she said, "Oh, it's the Church of Antioch," and I was like, oh my goodness. And she's like, I've always been fascinated by it, and I've wanted to see it, and I've always just thought into it. So that was kind of a confirmation within that.
Well, that was actually refresh, or that I'd never heard of Antioch until that season of praying for my husband. And I was just fascinated with it. And so that's another thing where I'm like, it doesn't have to be the superficial things that are united and like the signs of like, oh my gosh, yes, he does this. But it can be like the little details. So you're like, why does that matter?
All right, guys, today this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We are talking about the list, and something I want to add as we are thinking through what you should have on your list is, what are the green flags you should be looking for when you're dating someone? We talk about red flags all the time, but what about green flags? What about healthy signals that somebody could potentially be a good match for you? Well, I can't think of a better way to think about green flags than actually talking to a therapist who knows you, knows your story, and will help keep you accountable to the things that are actually good for you. I have been in therapy for years. As you guys know, I was in an abusive relationship many years ago and had some issues earlier in my life, and therapy has been such a healing tool for me. It's helped me figure out some of my own issues, as well as while I've been dating in the past, it's helped me look at the red flags and figure out what the green flags are for somebody that I'm wanting to commit to in a forever relationship. Another thing I love about BetterHelp is that it's fully online, which makes therapy affordable and convenient. And specifically, it serves over 5 million people, which is wild. When you join, you'll also have access to a network of 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. And yes, there are Christian-specific therapists on BetterHelp. And well, what happens if you don't like your therapist, or you get matched with somebody, but then it's just not the right fit for you? With BetterHelp, you can easily change your therapist at any time with no added costs. You guys, if you've never tried therapy and you are dating, I really think that you need to give it a shot. So let's figure out what your green flags in a relationship are with BetterHelp. You can visit betterhelp.com/HOD to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/HOD to get 10% off your first month.
It's really cool to hear because if you hear a traditional list for someone, have an idea of, I want to have an Antioch kind of life, and someone helps me, and that's on their list. That's just not what you would maybe normally hear. And then having someone who just learns about the book of Antioch and the church, and that's part of their vision too. You think about the heart underneath that. So you can have a list, but it's really amazing to hear the heart underneath, and then a healthy heart aligned with God and a godly vision. That list is going to look a lot different than another one. Like, I love that you sprinkled in physical stuff, but if you showed up and she had that background and everything, but she had blonde hair.
Well, and I don't even think I looked at that list until like 3 years into our marriage. And I remember I pulled out my journal and I was looking at it. I was like, oh, wow. I forgot about this.
But don't you think the list is like subconscious in some ways? Like a really imprint, like people make a list at 16, and it's kind of amazing to see how far and decades later it still lives. So it's almost like this subconscious, like feeding your heart to look for these values. Like, my heart, I want you to get really excited. I'm going to put a lot of hope in stock. But I have a question. It's not as related to the list. It's timeline. Cause I'm honestly, it's a harder one. A lot of times we hope when you marry someone, you're marrying all of them, meaning you're marrying the best things about them, and you're also humans. Meaning you're marrying their flaws, their maybe red flags or works in progress, what make them a human. After 3 months, did you have an idea of what those were, or did those maybe come out in this first year of marriage?
Oh, yeah.
You know, like at what
That
point
was a
was
quick
it
answer.
like, yeah, like did you know what you were signing up for totally, or were some of them more surprising?
No, there was so much that you discover within marriage. And that's even what we even kind of let people know when we tell them our stories. Like, yeah, it worked for us and that was great. But there we kind of maybe made things a little bit more complicated because we went off of a basis of actually my parents gave us 2 dates and it was like November or May when you could get married. And I'm looking and I'm like, well, it's July. I want to get married in November. I don't want to wait until next year. Like, let's go ahead and do November. And I remember just even the things like just things that are on our heart. Like when we got married and we were on our honeymoon, she started talking about interior design. And that was something I never even heard her tell anything about. And I had bought a house without her say so, her involvement of like any of the colors and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah.
You're very lucky.
Yeah. Well, it cost me down the road. I had to tear out a bunch of things and build a bunch of new stuff. I remember just seeing all those things coming in and like our first house, buying that. And then having all these things that she was like, I want to change this. I want to change this. I'm like, it's a brand new house. Like, we don't need to change anything. Everything's perfect. And so there was a lot of things that we discovered within the first year of our marriage that I was like, well, that would have been nice to find out, but it didn't change anything. It wasn't deal breakers. It was just like, oh, good to have awareness. And then, you know, it's everything that you learn in the first year of marriage too.
Yeah.
Listening. I came from all boys, so listening was a challenge. Yeah.
Toilet seat.
Yeah. No, actually, I don't have a problem with that. I've never had a problem. You never fell in? Nothing like that? We're good.
I never fell in.
Never fell in.
That's good.
We had like a little tally above the toilet that became a game of every time he would put it down, he would get a point.
That was the best hat. Like you made it a
honestly,
game.
a good habit breaker.
Prepared you for parenting.
Yeah.
Early morning.
But as far as like critical, non-negotiable, like red flags, 3 months was enough for you guys to kind of see the person that you're marrying. And then it's maybe more tertiary, smaller differences in lifestyle that come up. One
of the biggest things that I said about Christian, and I remember when my dad asked me, he said, what's your favorite thing about Christian? And she doesn't love this. But I identified it with him and I said, I think my favorite thing about her is that she's a hard worker. And he was kind of confused about that at first. It wasn't like, because she's so passionate about this or stuff. I said, no, I see she's a hard worker. And to me, that showed me very early on that regardless of what we'd navigate, regardless of what we'd go through, what we haven't talked about, I knew she would put in the work to be able to work through it. And I was like, I know that's going to be helpful for me, whether that's finances, that's relationships. It was just, that was always my favorite thing. And so, yeah, sure, we had things that both of us brought up to the table that we didn't know about, but I think both of us were very dedicated to the relationship, to working on things and not just allowing things just to settle.
Yeah.
I think also what stood apart to me is the way we did engagement.
Yeah.
Because I think there's sometimes, at least for some people, where you want to try to figure out everything about that person in dating, and it's actually not wisdom to open, like we were talking about this, but to open your heart up to someone in all the ways of like, oh my gosh, here's all my trauma. Here's what I think about everything. Yeah. But engagement, we made the choice of, okay, we've committed to each other. Now let's make sure like our hearts are ready. So there was stuff we shared once we were in engagement. Like we took it to that deeper level and took that as a time of intentionality to fortify that commitment and say, hey, if anything would have majorly came up, we would have reassessed, but wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Like, I think some people, once you get engaged, you're like, okay, well, let's plan the wedding. Let's get excited. Yeah. And you forget that's actually a time of deeper discernment.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I've never really thought about it that way because my personal view and what I told you actually ironically in the kitchen is the day you propose, you're basically marrying them in a lot of ways.
So that's what the biblical standard actually is.
And so, because we say go to pre-engagement counseling, because once you put on the ring, you've as much as that part of deeper discernment, it's hard to walk away. When you put the deposit on the venue, grandma's got her flight booked from Massachusetts, and all this, and then something comes up. Yeah. And so, but you can still walk away. We've seen people walk away, especially when it comes to that deeper discernment. I think if that's some going into engagement, you're open to like, hey, this is still not guaranteed. We still have some deeper revelation to discuss. Mm-hmm. How long were you guys engaged?
4 months.
Yeah, 4 months.
Yeah.
So we thought 3 months dating, 4 months engaged, 7, the perfect number of completion. Makes sense.
Well,
It makes a lot of sense.
Well, longer engagement than dating, that's not the most common either,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Which, if anyone was watching, I would also be hesitant of like, 3 months, that is
Yeah,
that is
you're good
quick.
to
You
go.
better have wisdom. But I would say shorter engagement. Because like once you're engaged, it is kind of like we've made this commitment and temptations there, timelines there. Like you don't want to sit in the pressure of planning the wedding and all this stuff. You just want to be joined together. So
Totally.
I would say shorter engagement.
Oh yeah,
Longer dating.
yeah. I would recommend that too. Something you guys were bringing up too, with like what you're looking for and what you said, Arden, is it very much was driven from more of that vision standpoint, which is awesome because when we teach a program called School of Dating, and we teach people like how do you what are your non-negotiables, and some of that what the non-negotiables should be is a need to have list of like these are values based, vision based, and then there's fun to have and nice to have items. And fun to have might be like, she has brown hair, or, like it's not a deal breaker if she didn't have brown hair, but it would be fun. Or like his fun to have would be like, she likes football. Well, I didn't like football, so he didn't get that fun to have.
Yeah.
She does now.
Now
She's been sanctified.
a little bit. And so, but something that we say and friends of ours say is the purpose of marriage isn't just to make you happy. Yeah. It really is to be able to glorify the Lord. And so the combination of a healthy marriage shouldn't be 1 + 1 = 2, because that's a perfect equation of there's nothing greater. So it really should be 1 + 1 = 3. The thought that together we could do more for the kingdom than apart. Together we're on mission together. We have a vision that aligns and things like that. But it sounds like you guys kind of were both in a place where you had that clarity. For somebody who doesn't have that, like what would you recommend? Because a lot of people are going to dating like, I don't really know what I'm looking for. You have two different kinds of people. One person who's like, I have this laundry list of expectations of like 50 things that are so stringent, and therefore they like, you see someone who's single till 45 because they just can't find someone who fits perfectly into this list. And then you have somebody who's dating, like, I don't really know what I'm looking for. Like, but I'll figure it out as I go along. What would you guys say to those people?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's trusting God. It's like, that was the big thing that I looked at my life and understanding, like my main priority has been my relationship with God. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people, when you are single, you forget that singleness is actually said in the Bible as it's a gift. Mm-hmm. And it's because so you can actually go deeper with God, deeper into your relationship with God. Yeah, that's right. You are going to always stay single. Yeah, but yes, like
you're going to be my little nun.
I'm like, you will stay with me forever. But like identifying that so that way, you really are not going into a relationship with the wrong standards or the wrong motives. Mm-hmm. Because I do think that was one of the biggest things for me is I was like, I've been so focused in on ministry and God that I feel like, things will line up perfectly, but I will know because I'll have discernment into it and I'll have that trust into God. And I'll also know that God is leading my steps onto this and he'll direct that. I think one of the biggest decisions in your life, and my dad has always said this, he said, one of the biggest things to accomplishing what God has on for your life is your spouse. Like your spouse will either hold you back or will propel you into your destiny. Yeah. And so me looking at the same thing where I've told people of, hey, the call on your life, what God has for you, God cares more about it than you do. I have to look at that for your spouse as well. Like if your spouse is going to be something that will either hold you back from your calling or propel you into it, God's going to care a lot about that. Yeah. And he's going to be involved in those details. So you seek after him and he'll make sure the righteous man's steps are ordered of the Lord. So that was kind of my trusting into that. And what I would encourage people to continue to keep doing that.
I think especially as I talk with other women, because that's mostly who I get to speak with is, there's an element where we can almost get tunnel vision, especially if you have been single for so long. Is like, okay, well, I've turned this person aside. I haven't settled. So like, man, this is what I'm looking for. And it does have to be that perfect package. Like, man, when is it ever going to arrive type feeling? And I think if you get to that place, especially is take a step back, and instead of what you're looking for in your spouse when you're dating, what are you looking for in your marriage? And what does that require of you? Because maybe, I'm not going to say that God doesn't bring you your spouse until you're doing everything perfectly, but it is such an invitation of you have uninterrupted time. You do have time to work on yourselves and your goals and your passions. So like, okay, well, maybe I'm getting a little tunnel vision. I'm getting antsy. I haven't met the one yet. Let me look at my marriage. What do I want within that? And what does that require of me? Because what we're saying that first year, I'm sure you guys can relate. It's like you learn so much about yourself that you've been blinded to until you have like this mirror of a spouse showing you. What do you mean I leave the toilet seat open? What do you mean I'm selfish? I'm impatient. So it's like, take this as a chance to say, okay, well, this is the kind of wife I'm going to be. And if God's telling me, like I've had girls come on and say, God told me he wants me to work on my cooking. He wants me to work on my patience. He wants me to work on my career. It's like, man, maybe that's unlocking something that is an expression of your marriage that you can go ahead and start now. And so maybe me finding the right guy, knowing what to put on my checklist, is knowing what God's put in me and listening to that and being open to that.
That's really interesting.
I love that.
Kate definitely didn't get the one about cooking and her singleness. That would have been a nice one for God to drop. But
that's why you're such a good cook. That's all it is.
Yeah. I have a harder one. So you have your list. Is there a possibility, though, that your list might be excluding someone who could be a perfectly great spouse in front of you in your community group? And how could I maybe double check? Should I have friends over and we pull it up on like the TV and you're like, so here's my list, and you give like a little TED talk?
PowerPoint presentation. I would say, yeah, of course it could be excluding someone, but maybe that's for good reason. Just because someone's a good catch doesn't mean they're the person you're supposed to spend your life with. I remember being in an internship at church, which I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
That's a look up.
But being in a church internship, and there was a great guy, like awesome guy, and he asked me out, and I just, in my spirit, I was like, I'm not excited about this, not even from like a superficial level, but I'm just like, I don't really see how we would sharpen each other. But some friends were like, oh, but you know what? You're in an internship together. This is great. You dated a guy that wasn't so great. So this is good for you. I was like, I don't want good for me. I want to feel like this is right. This is alignment. This is my partner. So I did try the date, and it was not there, like whatsoever. Great guy. You know what I mean? But I think there's something of a call to uniqueness. And it doesn't have to be, I know you talk about this, it doesn't have to be, man, right away I had the butterflies of feeling I'm seeing wedding bells, but it should be, this does feel like on the right track, even if it's just one step at a time.
He definitely didn't play Call Me Maybe.
He didn't.
No, that wasn't on the list at all.
That's what he was missing.
That's it.
Sorry.
That's it. Just trying to get it to loosen up. But I would say almost treat it like this. If you know your list is God breathed, where you're like, hey, I sought God, and I'm not just putting things on here because I think it's a good thing, or it's like, oh, I want this, but you know, like I've trusted God into this. I've looked at what is God speaking over my life? What does that line with my spouse? I would almost treat it similar to prophecy in the way that if someone gave me a prophecy, I'm not going to change everything about my life to align up with that person's prophecy. But what I am going to do is I'm going to test it. And that's what the Bible says. So I'm going to probably put it on a shelf, like see, like, okay, I remember that person spoke that over to me. See, okay, God, I'm going to keep chasing after you. So many of the prophecies I feel like have been spoken over my life, I've always looked back on and been like, that didn't really make sense. And then I look 2020 and I'm like, wow, that made total sense. I see how that aligns. I see how it's actually what he was actually saying right here. I saw it when he said it this way. I thought it was going to be this way, but now I see it from a completely different vantage point and viewpoint. And so seeing it from that, where it's like, you're not locked yourself into, hey, this is the thing. Like even with my list of, I wrote it all down because I felt like in that moment, this is what I felt like God was saying. But I didn't just every single time I met a girl running through that whole list. The girl I actually dated right before Christian or went on a date with was blonde and taller and all these things. And I was like, very different from what Christian was and what was on my list. But I felt like just being able to like know the things that I wanted to, know the things that I put onto that was God breathed, but then not allow it to dictate my life, but watch as I knew I prayed into that and I watched as God would bring those things to pass in the way that he saw it would make sense, in the way that was not going to control my life.
Which we do have the friends though, that it does feel like okay, there was a catch and you're just pushing the good ones away and clinging on to the bad ones.
Yeah.
And I would say if your friends are doing that, like, hey, here's the presentation. There's a good guy. Can you please just try this route?
That PowerPoint's a good one.
If you're there and your friends are telling you that, I would do some soul searching, because we've seen some people do the self-sabotaging of, well, I feel shame because of my past. I've messed up, or, for whatever reason, and I don't deserve the good guy. And you keep pushing that away. Yeah. So if you are in that camp, I don't know if that's where the question was going.
Well, and I think there's also people that will almost, I have like friends and people I know that will almost always see the best in somebody, even if it's to their detriment of like, you're just always seeing the best in them, even though these things really aren't good for you. You're going to always, which is a beautiful gift.
Like you need to be more picky.
Yeah, maybe a little more picky. But to your point, like before I met JJ that same year, I dated a few guys that were awesome guys that were like on paper, I would recommend them. I still am trying to set up a few of them with people today. I'm like,
you talk to them?
We group text. And but it just at the end of the day, it wasn't anything like that was giant red flags about them, but I knew what I was looking for and wanted to build, and it just there wasn't a great fit there. Wasn't, I feel like, what God's best was, but doesn't mean that there were these giant red flags. They were unhealthy guys, but they were solid, godly men, and it just wasn't for me. To your point of like, hey, because that brings up JP's advice that he says, we talked about this on your show too, he's like, just find the godliest person you know and marry them. That's his biggest dating advice of what to look for. Find the godliest person and marry them. And I think we've like debated this with him. I'm like, I like where you're trying to go for, but I also think that it misses a lot.
Well, it's a pendulum swing from maybe where the majority of people, which is where the most picky we've ever been before.
Yeah, that's true.
And
because you have so many, you feel like you have so many options or no options.
And we got to swing backward, to the other side. So
I do want to talk about that one person though. And then, sorry, I interrupted you, but
I'm used to it. It's okay. No.
This one question, I see a lot of people say this. I just don't see myself with them. Like I just I just can never see it, What do you guys think about that opinion or that line that I feel like a lot of people end up saying?
I think, go ahead. You got a lot more experience with it.
Yeah, I feel like all of Christian dating advice is talking out both sides of your mouth, right? Because it's like, well, this, but if that, exactly. And then it's really, if we're gonna get the best way to discern all of this is like, there's really no blanket statements.
Yes,
but you have to know yourself, and I believe why do you think you're not a good fit with them? Is it because like they're a great option, but they're not your option? Or are you just saying, man, I'm scared to get hurt again, so I'm going to say something so I don't have to put myself out there, right? Because it's so nuanced. Like, what are the layers behind that statement? Exactly. But for me, if you are in a healthy place and you're like, I don't see myself with them, give it a shot or two, but don't force that.
Right.
Because there's a whole idea of, is it best to be friends before or like the love at first sight? And for me, at least how I know I'm wired, what's intentional of I needed to see in my marriage, because my parents come from a divorce background. And I was very aware of, okay, marriages don't always work. So I need to have like this strong assurance that like, this is my person. Maybe someone else doesn't need that. Like they saw their parents be best friends their whole marriage. And so they're like, oh, well, I just want to be friends at first. So for me, I needed to know I can see myself with this person. Like I'm naturally going to doubt, like, do I have what it takes to be a good wife, to be committed in this? So I feel like out of the Lord's kindness, he showed me, hey, this is a person you can trust. I'm going to give you, they have great parents. There's a great family dynamic. So I don't think that was all because I got lucky or just because like we're the lucky ones. We have that short and sweet engagement, but it was more of, God, I'm praying for you to give me vision of you can do this and you can do it for me. I think sometimes even in a non-relationship aspect of just faith, we're like, okay, God, I believe you're good, but are you good for me? Yeah. Like, I believe you can heal people. Can you heal me? I believe you can tell people to prophesy, but can you do that through me? So, that is a deeper well to your question, but I do think, you should be able to envision your life together. Maybe
Yes.
not on the first date, but it's like, is there no vision? Is there no commonality?
Yeah.
You don't have to both love football and want to spend your Saturdays gardening together.
See, you can tell she's from the
Monday,
South because she said
Thursday,
Saturdays,
and
not
Sunday.
Sundays, too.
Exactly. I'm like, wait, it's a Monday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday for me. But I think what you're revealing is that it's more of maybe challenging why you're saying no, why you're saying I can't see myself with them. Because I think if there's a legitimate like, no, I'm really thinking through this and it's not going to work for a good, healthy reason, then that's totally okay. But some people are just like, no, his teeth are off and I can't see myself with somebody with hair like that or no hair if he's bald, and it's like, that's where it usually leans, in my opinion, when they're like, I can't see myself with that. It usually leans, in my opinion, a little more superficial. It's like, oh, he's bald. And so no,
But friends can call that out.
Right,
Like if your
yes.
friends can call it out why it's a no, then I think, okay, challenge it. But if they're like, oh, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way, but just do it.
Yes.
That's when I feel like, no, lean into that.
I have a question.
I agree with
Do you think that's maybe more of a female experience as well? Like, not to just overly stereotype and generalize, but
I love to hear from you.
I don't
guys.
really feel like in my guy time as a single, there was a ton of that. Like, you should, she's a great girl. She's got great character. You should reconsider. I felt like it was like, okay, yeah, like you don't find her hot, so just like it really came down to that,
I agree. I think it was only like guys would get involved if it really got to like an unhealthy place and they saw that and was like, hey, this girl's not bringing the best out of you. Then they would get involved. But then outside of that, it's very much like, no, like, cool.
Probably to
Move
like
on.
a detriment, right? Like we probably are not as involved or sharing like what's going on until
I
it's
was
really
going to
bad.
ask why.
Yeah.
Why is
Yeah,
it
I was going to
happening?
say like it's not good.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's just mainly most guys' tendencies. We try not to overcomplicate or overanalyze something or feel something. And so even with guys, it's like you want to more focus in on the things that you're like, well, we can connect and we just, yeah, sure, let's move on. Let's not go deep onto a conversation about why you don't feel this person's the one for you or why is this, which, is just to your detriment oftentimes. And it could be a reflection of your friends. But I also think there's almost a balance that helps you from not going when you have healthy friends that will be like, hey, let's talk a little bit about this, but let's not go so deep that we're over analyzing it and getting you into a place. Because I know from myself, it's like I think I'm rather a logical person and that feelings are something that I'm like, man, I feel them. Yes, but like I tend to not show them as much. But then when I do show them, I feel like it's almost to a place where it's over analyzed and overthought. And then I have to be like, oh, okay, wait. I just now thought this through. Okay, this makes sense. No, I'm good. And like work through it. I'm like, okay, we're great. And I think sometimes it's guys can feel things so strong and it almost helps balance it out a little bit. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit different, but that's what I feel like I've honestly walked through with my friends where I've seen them navigate those things and walk through it in that way. And I think it's helpful a little bit, but also can be detriment. Yes, in some instances.
What do you think, babe?
Well, it's hard because I keep thinking, I'm like, a lot of it just depends on how much the guy's willing to share and open up that door to his house and be vulnerable and share. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm thinking. And if you're like the friend, then you feel like you're prying and you're like overstepping and it's like not an area. But I do, maybe that's just like the spectrum, like where women kind of miss over here. They overshare, overthink, and guys maybe under. It's like, man, there's definitely a balance center for both.
Yeah.
I think actually what we're saying actually is the best for both sides is wise counsel. Like having wise counsel, girls don't just overthink with your girlfriends, analyzing every detail, analyzing all the things, like, cause that's what sometimes girls do. It's like we overanalyze everything. Oh, he texted, this exclamation point means he's, upset, or this period means he's not interested. And, we're like way too much looking into the details, and we need actually somebody wise to be like, hey, stop overthinking here. Like, let's come back to reality. And probably for guys, they need the same thing of wise counsel, especially for a guy who leans more avoidant or commitment fear, has a commitment fear, to be like, hey, at the end of the day, you just need to make a decision. Like, you just need to get in there, analyze the healthy things, don't make it about superficial things, and just make a decision. And I think both of us could actually just use probably a little more of that wise counsel at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's why we get married to each other. Women and men help balance each other out, bring the best things out of each other.
So true.
That's why it is.
Yeah.
Well, don't you even think, I wonder if women more analyze and guys just go for it because guys are the pursuers. And I think it's within the nature of like, maybe the guy doesn't have to question, okay, should I go for this or not? Because like that should be something that they feel really deeply and like a strong conviction. And like you as the prize of a woman should say, okay, I get to choose. Like, do I want to allow this person to have part of my heart? Like, am I protecting or am I ready to open myself up? Yeah. So I think some of that analyzing, as long as it's not over analyzing, is just a part of the process and like can be really beautiful. Like, wow, this is the person that I am willing to put my heart out there for, because to love is to risk. And so there is evaluation needed. But like, what a beautiful thing when you're like, man, I've journeyed through the questions and it's a yes.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of to wrap is like for men, that list. I think if you don't open it up to wise counsel and a healthy man, it's just going to be whatever you were raised with and whatever you fed your heart in like your teenage years. So for me, that was porn and a really maybe old school legalistic form of like female submission. And that's the only thing that my list would have looked like, you know, was, so I would say maybe the only thing I would say for men is just invite the healthiest, godliest men you know, who you respect.
I actually remember when I wrote my list, I was sitting on an airplane right next to my dad. Yeah. And I asked her his counsel and, and I watched that and he spoke into it, and it was, that's amazing advice.
What a gift. Yeah. I'm so jealous, honestly. Like that is so special to have as a young man. So, well, thank you too.
Yeah.
3.
3, yeah.
She's like, do not leave me out.
People like, when did the baby pop up if they're watching on YouTube?
I know. You guys have to watch on YouTube to see the little baby girl.
Well, thank you guys so much. It was so special.
Yeah, guys. We love y'all.
We'll see you in 6 years. Yeah,
there we go.
The Heart of Dating podcast is created by Kate and JJ Tomlin. Shout out to our epic audio and video editor, Scott Caro. We have an amazing Heart of Dating team who helps bring the show to you each week. I want to shout out Elena Gibson, our brand and community manager. Now, if you guys have never ranked us or reviewed us on iTunes or Spotify, would you consider doing that? It would mean so much because our podcast can get more discovered and more people can learn how to better date as Christians. Don't we all want that? We launch our podcast each and every week on Wednesdays, so we will see you next week.